let's kind of look at the question that was asked. Not sure if maybe the lab was like the reason for the question or the reading or something like that. But the question was, how do we get information from one neuron to another? Is that basically right?
Yeah, I thought if it was through the synapse, that's what I was asked.
Okay, right. So how do we basically get this passing along of information? Well, let's go back to my drawing, okay? All right. Now, the one that I'm going to explain, okay, is going to be the one that probably we're most familiar with, which is basically just movement of the body, all right? For example, right now, you're sitting here and you're saying, come on 9:15, come on 9:15, okay? Hey, I've been a student, I'm still a student, but the difference is now I take classes I want to take, okay? You're sitting there and you're thinking, what's going to happen at 9:15? Hopefully, Dr. Young's going to say, take a break, be back at 9:30. Right? Right. Now, as you're sitting there waiting for that, okay, at 9:15, when I do finally say that, what do you guys do?
Stand up.
We stand up, okay? We have to get up to do that, all right? Then we have to do something to start walking, or we're going to grab our phone, whatever the case might be, okay? Now, here's what's been happening. In your brain, you're going to find, okay, we have our primitive portion, which is the portion dealing mostly with the area of the brain stem, stuff that we're needing for homeostasis. But then we've got this huge portion of the brain that we think about, okay, when we say brain, which is the cerebrum. If anybody's ever told, has anybody ever told you you're very cerebral? Okay, they're basically telling you that you use your brain a lot. Okay, so the cerebrum, in the cerebrum, where we've got the frontal, we've got the parietal, we've got the temporal, we've got the occipital, in a lot of the areas of like the frontal cortex and other areas too, but we're already creating the excitement of the neurons that are going to be needed to make your muscles move to get you going. Now, in part 1, did you guys learn in the muscular system and the skeletal system about the action potential? Okay, now, the action potential, how did that work?
That's a little hazy, but
Okay, let's look at this. All right, so up here, we've got our brain, right? Okay, so this is going to be my cerebrum. Let's put a little area down here from a cerebellum. Right here is going to be brainstem. I can't put BS because that's just not going to look right. Okay, so we'll put BST. Okay, now, well, that still don't look right, but y'all know what I mean, right? Okay, so I have a frontal, I have parietal, I have temporal, I've got occipital, all those different lobes, right? Okay, now, up here, you're going to be thinking about, yay, come on 9:15, better yet, come on 10:30 so I can get out of class for the weekend. It's a holiday weekend. Now, up here, you've got all these little neurons that are already firing. They're already getting those action potentials ready. Does that make sense? Okay. So up here, if I've got all of this firing, well, now think about this for a second. Is that my sensory or my motor information? It's my sensory information. So if that's my sensory information, the next thing I got to have is my motor output, right? How many neurons do we basically have? 2. Okay, so these up here that are acting as my sensory neurons, they're going to start firing, okay? And they are going to be connected to a dendrite of one of those upper motor neurons that have to go to my, y'all remember how they went to the spinal cord? Then we got the information out because that was my second. Okay, is everybody with me? So this is my sensory information. So up here, let's kind of blow this picture up and let's go with the neuron that we're familiar with, which looks like this. Okay. Remember how these are my terminal ends? Okay. Remember, if this is my sensory neuron, the only product it can make is that protein that will be sent down the axon, and that will get released because it's firing. All right? So, if my sensory, all right, is connected to my motor, that means the dendrites of my motor neuron, in this case, we'll say our upper motor neuron with my axon coming down to the terminal buds, okay, that's going to excite my dendrites, right? So this area right here, this is my synapse.
That's the area in between, right there.
The area in between. So those chemicals from the sensory, the neurotransmitters, because that's the only thing it can be, okay? Those neurotransmitters, do you guys remember inhibitory potentials and excitatory potentials? Now, neurotransmitters that get released, they can either inhibit the neighboring, the connecting neuron, or they can excite it. In this case, we're going to excite it, okay? So, that means this dendrite is receiving all these little chemicals. Now, based upon what we now know about a plasma membrane, okay, here's what's going to happen. Those little neurotransmitters, they're going to come down to the dendrites. Here's my cell producing the product, the little protein, okay, which is another neurotransmitter. If the potential is great enough and that potential travels across the body of the neuron, it reaches an area called the axon hillock. If it reaches the area of the axon hillock, what do we find thousands upon thousands of in the membrane right here? Huh? What? Huh? Clear it up for me a little bit. What kind? What? Yeah.
Is it receptors?
Not nasal lot.
The what?
Not nasal lot, no.
The gated.
Our gated channels. Which kind?
Lightning. Like voltage.
Voltage. Because at this point, where was my ligand? up here. So I have now changed the potential. Now I have a ton of voltage gated in this axon hillock. And if voltage is dependent upon a electrical change, okay, and those voltage gated open, what gets to rush in? What ion? Sodium. My sodium gets to rush in, boom, to this area of the axon hillock. If I have excited this area of the axon hillock, this product, this potential, okay, since we're thinking about a spinal nerve, spinal nerves have the myelin. In between are my nodes of Ranvier, okay? Now, if the voltage begins to change, sodium has rushed in. Sodium, it makes it look like it jumps, but it begins to change the potential. Inside was negative. This is now becoming positive, and I'm changing the potential, which means as that sodium continues down, well, guess what's located by thousands in this node of Ranvier? What kind of, it's the same thing that we find in the axon hillock.
I know, a whole bunch, but I don't know what's our.
Another set of the voltage-gated channels. So once again, if I've got a whole bunch of voltage-gated, what gets to rush in? Sodium. So once again, I'm changing my potential. And that'll continue to the next node. What's located at the next node?
Same thing.
You better tell me voltage gated. Okay, voltage gated. Then, once again, what gets to rush in? Sodium, bada bing, bada boom. Still changing the potential. And this continues all the way down. And once I get down here, well, guess what? This one is going to be connected to something. It's going to be connected to another neuron. It could be connected to a gland, or it could be connected to muscle. And therefore, the product, the neurotransmitter, gets released at the terminal end of this one. And therefore, it will excite or inhibit the next neuron, most likely excite a gland. Think about your endocrine system, okay? Or it could excite the muscle. Now remember, this means skeletal, cardiac, or smooth. Now in our case that we were talking about, this is going to excite my skeletal muscle. So this is going to be synapsing on the skeletal muscles that are going to make your body move. And basically what it's doing, it's keeping just a little bit of an electrical potential in that muscle and also in the nerve, okay? Keeps a little bit of an electrical potential so those muscles are ready to go. So that when I say 9:15, and if you're sitting, okay, if you're sitting, you go, woo! All right? You don't go,
Well, what if you do that?
something's wrong. You're not normal. Something's very, well, that's it.
Well, if you're old, is it just you're sore?
No.
Your synapse.
If we didn't have that occurring in the higher order areas of the brain, your body wouldn't be ready to respond. it would actually have to start from ground zero, basically, to get it going, and it would take forever for it to get started.
Like a sloth?
Huh?
Like a sloth?
Like a sloth, yes. Because you gotta have a little bit of an electrical potential going. And everything on the electrical potential side is based on those ions. How would that ion, since we see sodium rushing in, and you have potassium's there too, okay? Calcium's there. Calcium's important for your nervous system also. But how would it regulate getting it back to a negative inside? What pump would we need? A sodium-potassium pump. So that's how it would balance back out to go into rest. So when it's not working, we call it resting membrane potential. Meaning there's a little bit of electrical potential, okay? Not a lot, okay? But it's some there. Same thing for the muscle. If you remember when you were talking about muscle contraction, we had a resting membrane potential for the muscles, okay? Same thing. It's keeping them ready for action. But at the same time, we call them at rest. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.